Uh, can you see the screen? Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to be a review of what I did during the summer with Bosch. Uh, so Bosch is interested in traffic scene understanding for a variety of reasons, which is they have their autonomous driving infrastructure, they have anomaly detection projects, and so on. So uh, there are problems with understanding objects in the scene using purely neural methods, and so my internship was about exploring neurosymbolic methods to do that. So what is scene understanding a little bit? Again, I already said what is scene understanding, but some places where it can be used is in traffic scene navigation. So you can identify objects to make decisions in the traffic scene. And then you can also use it for robot navigation. So you can, a robot has to move around particular environment and achieve some objective. Now, many times in these applications, safety is critical. In self-driving cars, this is true. Anomalous activity detection, this is true. And in robot navigation, also this is true. So purely neural network-based methods are going out of favor. And as in business units at these companies are imposing restrictions like there has to be explainability and robust reasoning. So robust reasoning means consistent reasoning, no hallucinations and that sort of thing. Um, neural networks still are the state of the art for powerful approximation. So large scale perception of what is happening in these, at least object recognition level, what is happening in these scenes. And then if we could map those to symbolic knowledge representations to achieve robust reasoning and explainability, that is the ideal outcome of this project. So first we start with a synthetic data set because we wanted to focus on the reasoning aspect in this internship. So if there is noise from the neural module in detecting what objects there are in the scene and all that, we wanted to first not deal with that kind of issue and just focus on how to improve the reasoning part of the outcome. So just small video. There is a tabletop, there are objects moving around, there are different shapes, materials, colors, and the only event that can happen here is two objects can collide, basically. So at an ontological level, there are several similarities with traffic scene here. The objects you can think of as cars, you can think of the tabletop as the environment, the video is some footage, hours of footage, and then you can frame by frame analyze it. Always when traffic scenes are being analyzed, there are particular events that are of interest. So here collision is one such event of interest. In an actual traffic scene, of course, there are many, but so we start with this synthetic domain. Um, a little bit about the data set. There are 4 types of questions that are part of the data set. One is descriptive, for example, how many spheres are moving. Another one is explanatory, which is which of the following is responsible for a collision. And predictive, what will happen next. And counterfactual is the same as predictive, what will happen, but with some small detail changed. So
So Kaushik,
the
the uh, is this is there this kind of inquiries or questions or queries, is this something very well understood by people? Is this something or there's any these specific things were new in terms of you know where in terms of your research? I mean, this descriptive, explanatory, predictive, and counterfactual,
Mhm.
asking have people been working on neural network, asking that how will we support all of these 4 things?
Not that I've seen, not people working in neural network, but this particular paper, Cleverer, was introduced in ICLR 2-3 years ago. And this was a paper that was introduced as a neurosymbolic AI benchmark. So in this paper, for the first time, they categorized the questions like this to say that if a neural network is able to achieve good success on these 4 types or categories of questions, then it is exhibiting robust symbolic reasoning, similar to how if you had a full knowledge graph and reasoned.
I see. So there was already a paper. You are saying clever. They are the one who raised these issues for, and
Yeah.
they raised this issue for neural network. Oh, they also already introduced new symbolic approach to address this.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you are doing some improvement on that, or you're trying to figure out
Yeah.
what.
We're doing some improvement on that.
Okay.
So the a particular neurosymbolic method that they introduced in this paper is normally you would have a question and the video, pass it through a neural network. And how would you do that? You would pixelate the video and then vectorize it using convolution layers and that kind of thing. Then you would tokenize the text and vectorize it using some language model, pass those through some combination neural network architecture, and then produce an answer. Sometimes the answer is verbose, in which you would use like a generative architecture to produce an answer one token at a time. Sometimes it's a single token, in which case you would use probably a discriminative architecture, like a multi-class classification problem. But what they introduced in this paper is when you ask a question and you provide the video as input, you don't actually produce as output of the neural network the answer directly, but you produce a functional program. So, for example, how many spheres are moving? You produce a program that first filters by objects in the scene, then filters by spherical shaped objects in the scene, then filters by moving spherical shaped objects, and then does a count aggregate. That will give you the answer two. So where once you obtain this program, you execute this program on a native physics engine that comes with this data set. It's like executing any other database query. So the neural network, this is essentially a machine translation issue. So it initially was tasked with taking the question as a sequence of tokens and producing an answer as a sequence of tokens. The only thing that changes right now is take the question as a sequence of tokens and produce a bunch of program tokens as the answer instead of natural language tokens. So what is the benefit of this change? The benefit of this change is that if the neural network can produce a program instead of the answer directly, it can be checked for correctness. The program can be checked for correctness because the program proof is available. And they have deliberately chosen the style of program to be a functional program because uh, without going into too much detail, if you produce a correct program, it is automatically I mean, if you produce a program that can solve the answer, it is automatically a correct proof. You don't need to do any extra work to show that this is provably correct. And then you can trace the program by looking at what happened first and what happened at the end, and that is a proof trace. So this way you can achieve robust performance and explainability. But there is a issue with this method that we identified, which I'll come to a little bit later. So what did we come up with? So first, we see that in this video, we need to represent the essence of what is going on in the video somehow. And so what does that mean? Which objects are moving? What directions are they moving in? Are they colliding? And in what frame are they colliding? These are the things that we need to capture from the video. So the first thing we do for extensibility is, because this is supposed to be modeling a traffic scene domain, a real life traffic scene domain, Bosch already has a traffic scene ontology, and we just extend that to include these synthetic objects. So
Is
an
this the
observation,
ontology that Ruan worked on?
yeah.
Okay.
So the observation is normally a car or a truck or something like that. But in this case, the observation is one of these objects. An atomic scene is a frame, equivalent of a frame. A complex scene can be an arbitrary collection of frames. For example, it could be frame one and then skip two and then three, four. A video, on the other hand, is a subclass of complex scene which necessarily needs to have the entire contiguous frame sequence corresponding to the video, one to four, for example, in this case. Um, so once you have this ontology, what can you do with it? You can write a Sparkle query to get the information that we need. First, information that we need is what are the collision events happening here. So we write a Sparkle query for that first. And Next thing we need is what directions are objects moving in. So we also write a Sparkle query for that. And what we end up with is a event ordering graph that captures what's going on in the video. So you get, for example, a gray rubber sphere is moving northwest, and the order of these events is downwards in time. So it's like a causal graph. This happens first, and this happens last, and captures what's going on in the video. So now, what is the function of the model that we are about to build? It takes a question and this graph as input, produces both the answer and the functional program corresponding to the correct answer. But in addition to that, it also produces an explanation graph, which is take this input graph and color it such that we can interpret it in a certain way. So what is the interpretation? If the edge is highlighted in green, then the neural network uh, has identified this event sequence, which is say blue sphere, rubber moving southeast, followed by green cube, metal moving northeast, this particular sequence, as being necessary to focus on to answer this question. That's the way to interpret this explanation graph. This red edge, for example, the blue sphere moving southeast and then followed by the collision between the gray sphere and the blue sphere, this event sequence, the neural network does not see as necessary to answer this question. So that's the inputs and outputs of what we're about to do, but then how do we achieve it? So the core part of this internship was about developing this module called Knowledge Inspector, which does this job. So takes that graph and produces an explanation graph. So we tried two implementations of it. One is using a full generative AI setup. So for example, so I'll skip details in the interest of time. In the generative AI setup, what we do is we treat this as a full generative model. We didn't use any pre-trained generative model. This generative model we coded from scratch. But what it's supposed to do is generate the question first and generate select knowledge from this input graph. So from this input graph, for example, and also generate the answer. So here the correct answers. So what we see when we use this implementation of Knowledge Inspector is that, so if you think of an ontology as two separate parts, which is a schema or a conceptual description of the domain model, and then an instance. So here you have frames, you have observations, you have points, and then so on. So those are schema concept elements, and then you have particular instances of those, which has some ID number associated with it, right? So what we saw in this generative modeling implementation is that the neural network hallucinates on the IDs, but it does not hallucinate on the concept. So it will never say something like a frame is a observation or an observation is a frame, but it will make up a frame 1023, which does not exist, for example. So this is, we already know neural networks hallucinate this way, but we still had to do the experiment to see. Why did we have to do it to see? It's to point out the error in the original Kleber paper, which is that if you get a neural network to produce a program, just as you would get it to produce a regular answer, this still does not prove that the neural network can reason, because this entire program can be hallucinated, right? So that was the purpose of the first implementation of the Knowledge Inspector. The second implementation is a little more explicit in how it encodes the knowledge graph. So the Knowledge Inspector is a now a module which I'll talk about the details maybe outside when if it's needed. But what it does is it produces this graph. Instead of producing a generative output like this, it produces this graph. And so now you can see explicitly um, what is the event sequences that the neural network is focusing on. And these graph edges cannot be hallucinated because you give as input the graph edges that actually exist in the video. And what you ask the neural network to do is just recolor it to explain to us what is the things that it is focusing on when answering the question.
So in this, where is the spatial element?
The spatial element is downwards in time these events are happening. And I mean, this is the temporal element, but the spatial element is that things are happening in space as well, right? So colliding and moving, but things are also happening in a particular ordering in time.
No, no, but I mean, okay, sorry. So your where is the location information? Where is the position information on
Yeah.
the position in particular?
So the XY coordinates, when we included, which is the position information. So here, for example, CL point BBX and BBY, which is bounding box XY coordinates. What happens is these coordinates are recorded at such a level of precision, like they have 8 significant bits after the decimal. It just confuses the neural network. So we had to come up with an abstraction that did not include the coordinate information specifically, but just what directions, what cardinal directions are these objects moving in, and are they on a collision course or not. We had to come up with an abstraction to just describe this much without getting into exactly what coordinate is the object currently in, because that is just noise to the neural network as we, in our experiments at least. Maybe there's a way to encode that information, but so far we haven't managed to do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I don't understand that point. And I'm just thinking whether you could have that information separately. Like, there's a separate spatial information, and then for a particular action, you query it and say, yeah, this is where the involved objects are.
Okay.
I'm guessing that will be very powerful model. For example, would this be a head-on collision or a collision on the side? Would it be a collision on the driver side or the passenger side? That kind of stuff, you see?
Yeah. So that is a very good point, Dr. Chet, because the follow-up to this experiment is a data set called Clever Humans. Clever Humans is here, for example. This is Clever originally. This is Clever Human. Utkarshni and Corey are working on this. But this has more fine-grained descriptions of events, like you just mentioned. The red sphere moves towards the cyan object, and something comes from top or comes from the left, and then they can not just collide, but they can hit and bump and so on.
Mm.
So this has more fine-grained information. And the method that my team came up with, we also applied to Clever Humans. And so you'll see, I can maybe show a demo soon. So we'll get to that question here in a bit.
Mm.
Um, so,
Kaushik, this is Mike Hughes. If I might ask a really more fundamental question, with large language models, a huge amount of text is processed for learning, and basically what a system learns is sort of how to predict the next word. In this case, you're not using a huge amount of video information to predict the next frame in a video sequence, are you?
no.
Okay.
We're predicting the program tokens, not the next frame in the video. The video is
Okay.
the input. Yeah.
Kaushik, I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
Can you hear me?
We could hear you earlier better.
Let me mute. Yeah, so in the model, you refer to this as the neural network.
Mm-hmm.
What is the neural network here? Is it the knowledge graph embedding model?
It's a transformer architecture, but
with respect to the graph.
Okay. Yeah, it's a knowledge graph embedding model to encode the graph.
So when you reconstruct the graph, are you doing link prediction?
In the so I'll say that in this first method, we embed the graph. In the second method, we don't actually embed the graph. We don't use Transy and others. We use a different kind of architecture that produces this graph, and that is a sort of new. It is not an embedding method, and therefore you don't need to do link prediction to reproduce this graph.
So how do you obtain the output graph?
Yeah, so maybe we'll have this conversation separately, but it's similar to the ideas of taking a self-attention matrix of a transformer and interpreting that as a graph, but with some more bells and whistles added to it, necessary bells and whistles. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so for future work, there's a paper in the works, perhaps an invention report, and then so like I said, there's a preliminary implementation on clever humans, but we want to take that a bit further when Utkarshni and Corey are ready with the stage that they want to be in. And then some of the open research questions is, why did we not see errors in, hallucinations at the concept level or at the schema level, and only at the instance level? So my hypothesis for that is there is much more regularity at the schema level, given that this is a lightweight ontology. So the neural network saw a lot of repeated patterns at the schema level, and being a pattern recognizer is able to fit to that more easily than the instances where the numbers change quite a bit at the instance level. That's a hypothesis, still we don't know for sure. So we'll know that when we move to a more realistic data set where the ontology is more complex in the sense it has more hierarchy. So video contains frame contains observation, observation contains objects, objects can contain properties, and then they could occlude. Here there's no occlusion, for example. So several things like that. When you have a more complex ontology, these questions will become more apparent, the answers to these questions. And then when you move to, again, a more complex real world scenario, we probably have to upgrade our architecture as well. So in this work, the language model that we built from scratch, that is not ChatGPT, is not BERT either. It's just a similar architecture. But when we move to a more realistic domain, we may have to also change to the scales required. For example, you use the same configuration as BERT, which is 12 attention heads and 6 blocks, or ChatGPT, which is 16 blocks and 24 heads. We may need to just make the neural network larger. Okay, so for Dr. Chat's question, let me see if I can do a demo. So which of the following is responsible for the blue cylinder moving? If we look at the video while that is happening, here's the blue cylinder. Now first the yellow and red objects collide, and then that yellow object collides with the blue cylinder, and then that moves, right? So this is from the clever humans dataset, where the task is not to produce a program, but to produce natural language explanations. So the neural network gets this right. The red cube hit the yellow ball, which we saw. The gold ball then hits the blue cylinder, which we also saw. So that's fine. But for further proof, which is the point of this knowledge inspector, we provide this explanation graph. So then we can go and visualize this somewhere. Here, for example. And you can see the explanation graph. So the explanation graph is that the yellow ball came from above first, which is here. So here you see a little bit of the spatial information. The yellow ball came from above, and then the red cube came from the left. red cube hit the yellow ball, then gold ball hits the blue cylinder. Um, and then the blue cylinder moves. So this is the explanation. And this disconnected part is just something else that happens in the video, which isn't part of the explanation, which is the red cube hits the brown ball and the brown ball moves later. So this red cube hits this brown ball and that brown ball moves. So that's the idea. Again, for clever humans, which includes more fine-grained spatiotemporal information, we have conducted only preliminary experiments, and we still need to investigate further to see how well this can do as a method for the whole data set, and then when we move to more realistic data sets. Okay.
I have another question. Can you go back to the first slide that you showed the graph?
First
slide.
The graph. This?
Yes. No, I mean, you had some statistics about the graph.
Statistics
so the input graph. Yeah, how many objects are there? How many relations are there? So the ontology.
Okay. Here. This is for this example. So there's one video here, 4 atomic scenes, 18 observations across those frames, 4 frames and 5 objects. This is only for this example.
So for each question, you only take the graph constructed from the scene. Is it the case?
Yeah.
So you don't look at, you don't learn from the subgraphs or graphs from the other examples.
So no, the other example meaning other videos.
Yes, other videos, yes.
No, because the question is asked for that video and we only use that video. Yeah.
But then what is the purpose? I mean, what purpose does the graph serve here? Because the information that you extract to construct this graph is already present in the data set, right? For example,
So the question.
Yes.
The reason for that is extensibility. So this started off as a benchmark, right? So if you have this traffic scene understanding, you are able to add this clever ontology to it. Then we are further able to extend it to clever humans ontology. And we may further be able to extend it to, say, other traffic data sets. So the point is to have a standard knowledge graph that is extensible to all these different domains without having to depend on the data set every time to extract it.
You mean the ontology, not the knowledge graph, right?
The ontology, yeah.
Yes, so ontology, I agree with the ontology part. I mean, exactly that's what we did with the driving scenes. But with respect to knowledge graph, I'm still trying to understand what purpose does it serve with respect to the question answering part. Because you are not learning from the other examples. You are just looking at the graph generated for this particular scene. And the information that you put in the graph is already there in the data set that you can read, that is readily available for a model. So the graphical structure that you introduce as the input, what purpose does it serve?
Right. So what you're saying is what we do actually. We have just the ontology. And then when processing a video, we instantiate the ontology for that video, do these 2 queries, and then delete the instances. Then when we process the next video, we reload the instances for the next video. So it's not the case that the instances are always present in the knowledge graph.
Okay. So isn't it an, sort of an overhead every time you have to?
So this project had a lot of underlying themes to it at the beginning. For example, Alessandro is a fan of cognitive architectures. So he was trying to simulate, say, working memory. And then he was trying to simulate long-term memory. In working memory, you load and reload through buffers. And in long-term memory, you have an ontological scaffolding that you use to reason about the world. So there are many things I didn't talk about here, but these were the reasons, some of the reasons for these design choices.
Okay. No, got it. Thanks.
Hi, Kaushik. I have a very basic question, which is how do you create ontologies for such cases wherein you have videos? Is it handcrafted?
Ontology is created using, first you start with a schema, like a traffic scene ontology, and then you can use an automated program, like RDFlib or something in Python. It's not handcrafted.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right. Forrest, if you are there, do you want to, maybe extemporaneously, just mention what you saw?
Sure. So I was in the ICAPS conference in Prague, and the ICAPS is the International Conference on Automated Planning and Scheduling. And so one thing that was really eye-opening about it is that the people there were very aware of, these other conferences like NeurIPS and things like that, and how they are essentially solving planning problems, especially with, reinforcement learning methods, but of course are pretty removed from the planning literature. They don't use the planning lingo. It's kind of two different people solving problems that are similar, but with very different techniques. And so one thing I noticed is that they were interested in solving, these problems that people work on NeurIPS. But I think one area in which they're lacking, of course, is the learning part. So given a good representation, they have algorithms to solve, these problems that people do. Say with robotics, they're doing block stacking, or they are doing some object manipulation task. So they have planning algorithms to solve these problems. But in the reinforcement learning literature, people are usually interested in robots that learn without any previous assumptions. They just learn from pixels. And so if you're just given pixels, you don't have a good representation on which to plan. So I thought a very good area for bridging these two domains would be model learning. So model-based reinforcement learning a model of the world, and then based on this model, planning with it. So this is actually something that Masag is working on, learning a discrete model based on pixels. And then hopefully next, what we can do is actually have discrete representations of objects in the world and then plan based on that. And so that was just one area that I thought was ripe for collaboration. And other things that stuck out to me were just mainly these opportunities for learning and planning. There were a lot of them. And another thing that surprised me is people were very aware of this, my previous deep cube research with the Rubik's Cube. And so people actually didn't really know like what was going on if I presented it at like iClear or NeurIPS or something like that. But at this planning conference, they were very aware of what it was. So I thought that was very interesting.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's about it.
Good. And what about the KDD?
Yeah, so KDD was great because I got my PhD from UC Irvine. It was right next to Irvine. So
I heard you visited UCI.
Yes, I saw Misag and Deepa on the campus. I just ran into them when I was on campus. It was a funny coincidence. So KDD. So KDD, I think one of the more interesting talks was actually from Samir Singh. And Samir was a member on my thesis defense committee. And he was talking about editing models. So these large language models that aren't producing text, but can read text and take in new information and then edit that text. So say, for example, you have a Wikipedia article and you realize that somebody had switched teams, like a football player. And so instead of regenerating that entire Wikipedia article, it would be just editing the parts that say which team this person currently plays for and the move that they made, why they made that move. And so you would take that in from some new information, say from some news article, and just edit those parts of the Wikipedia article. And this is what Samir Singh was talking about. And another really interesting use case someone brought up from the audience was editing code. So imagine there's some code written for Python 2. Could you potentially read in the new requirements for Python 3, compare that with Python 2, and then edit that code so that it can run on Python 3? So I thought this was very interesting because you're not trying to generate the text from scratch. You're just trying to make these small edits. And you want to do this with new knowledge that's been provided to you.
But it's impressive. I mean, are you able to do that in all generative sense, or there is some other way to constrain the problem?
That's a good question. So what Samir was saying is you do have some constraints, but these constraints are very general, and they're supposed to be learned based on previous examples of editing. And so the news articles that are given to you essentially would be constraining the model as to what it should be paying attention to. So they have these multiple steps as to what is relevant and then what information do you want to replace it with.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So anybody else? Deepa, are you going to formally present anything, or you want to? If you're not presenting formally later, then you can give your viewpoint.
Yeah, Dr. Chid, I can discuss later.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was very good, and I hope that all the other interns will also follow up with similar, presentations. So we are aware of, very important thing is everybody should attend this meeting, so you know what is happening in our own large group and what expertise somebody else has, so that collaborations occur, in a seamless manner. And okay, anything else anybody wants to add? And I saw some people attend, join very late. Guys, you should, we mean 10 a.m. means 10 a.m. So try to join at the time.